The chandeliers above glittered like frozen fireworks, their golden glow pouring over the ballroom's polished marble. Amelia balanced a silver tray against her hip, the weight of champagne flutes steadying with each careful step. Her shoes pinched at her toes, and her black uniform felt far too tight for comfort, yet she walked with the quiet dignity of someone who had no other choice. A single mother at 24, she knew every hour of overtime mattered. Tonight's gala promised long tips, and she needed the extra money for her daughter's school fees. The guests drifted in clusters, their voices rising and falling like waves breaking against expensive silk gowns and tailored suits. The hum of the evening was interrupted only by clinking glasses and occasional bursts of laughter that never seemed to include her. Amelia tried to blend into the background, invisible, but she could feel eyes lingering, measuring her by her uniform, by her accent, by her lack of jewelry. Some smiled politely, but more often she caught a smirk or a whisper. At the head of the hall, Adrian Cross, the billionaire host of the evening, stood tall among the executives. His dark hair was combed back with immaculate precision, and his tailored navy suit reflected both power and ease. To the world, Adrian was untouchable, a man who moved markets with a signature and built empires with a glance. Tonight, the gala wasn't merely about celebration. It was about the unveiling of a colossal merger, a deal worth billions, one that everyone assumed would seal Adrian's name even further into financial history. As Amelia weaved between the tables, the words of some guests floated to her ears, sharper than the bite of spilled champagne. Who invited the help so close to the table? One woman whispered, her diamond necklace flashing. Another man chuckled, she probably doesn't know the difference between a merger and a menu. Laughter followed, brittle and dismissive. Amelia lowered her gaze, forcing her lips into a practiced smile, the same one she used whenever her daughter asked why mommy worked so late. She placed another flute of champagne onto the table near the contract folder. That was when her eyes, quick and restless from years of survival, caught a glimpse of the document itself. Bold letters scrawled across the top. Acquisition agreement. Her heart skipped. It was not the word merger she saw, but the particular phrasing below it, reverse takeover clause. Her breath caught in her throat, memories crashing in like a tide. She had seen this before. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, calm but firm. Professor Marcus Lane, a man who had lived and breathed economics, had once sat with her late into the night explaining traps hidden in contracts that looked harmless. He had scribbled examples on scraps of paper, making her repeat them until she understood. If you ever see a reverse takeover clause, Amelia, he had said with grave intensity, warn them. It gives the illusion of control, but in truth, it transfers everything to the other side. She blinked hard, trying to steady her breath. Could it be the same? Surely, she thought, these lawyers and investors surrounding Adrian would have caught it. Yet the wording jumped at her again and again, clear as day. Her fingers tightened on the tray as a sick feeling churned in her stomach. Adrian Cross was about to hand over his empire without realizing it. Amelia shifted back, torn between silence and the rising need to speak. She remembered her father's small note tucked in her purse, a note he had written before he passed, summarizing dangerous clauses every company feared. She had carried it like a lucky charm, never expecting it to matter outside her own understanding. Tonight, of all nights, the note burned in her memory like a lantern in the dark. Another burst of laughter nearby snapped her back. The executives were already gathering near Adrian, preparing pens, smiling like sharks circling prey. The shareholders murmured, their excitement palpable, while lawyers stood ready to witness the monumental signature. None of them noticed the young waitress who lingered by the table, her pulse racing faster than the violins playing in the background. The sting of another cruel remark, "She looks lost, like a stray cat among lions," was almost enough to push her away. Almost. But then she thought of her daughter, asleep at home with her grandmother, and of her father's words. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something matters more. And in that moment, Amelia knew she couldn't walk away. The tray trembled slightly in her hand as she adjusted it and straightened her back. She had no power, no wealth, and certainly no invitation to the conversation about to unfold. But she had knowledge, and knowledge was something even the richest could not dismiss forever. Her eyes met Adrian's across the table, just briefly. He was laughing with the opposing CEO, unaware that the paper in front of him was a loaded weapon. Amelia swallowed hard, her throat dry, and whispered to herself, "Don't sign that." It was so soft it barely left her lips, but in her chest, it felt like thunder. Amelia's whisper hung in the air like an accidental note in a symphony, almost lost beneath the hum of violins and chatter. Yet Adrian's head tilted, his sharp ears catching what no one else bothered to hear. He frowned slightly, glancing at her, unsure if he had misheard. The pen poised in his hand stilled just a fraction of a second. And then, without meaning to, Amelia's voice came again, louder this time, trembling but clear. "Please, don't sign that." The room seemed to freeze. The champagne flutes stopped midair. The laughter halted. For a moment, every eye in the room darted to the young waitress who had dared to interrupt the grand ceremony of power. Her tray rattled against her palm as heat flushed through her body, but her gaze stayed locked on Adrian. "What did you say?" one of the lawyers demanded, his tone dripping with disdain. A burst of laughter erupted from the corner, sharper now, like knives thrown in her direction. "She thinks she can read contracts," another guest sneered, his words pulling chuckles from those nearby. "What's next? The waitress giving us stock advice." Amelia wanted to shrink into the ground, but her father's voice rang in her ears, steady and unyielding. She tightened her grip on the tray, inhaled, and lifted her chin. "That contract has a reverse takeover clause," she said, her voice steadying with every syllable. "If you sign it, you won't own your company tomorrow morning." "They will." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed quickly by another roar of laughter. The opposing CEO, a tall man with a permanent smirk, leaned back in his chair and clapped mockingly. "How charming. Our server doubles as an economist. Tell me, sweetheart, did you overhear that term in a movie?" His words sent more snickers across the room. Adrian's gaze, however, had sharpened. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss her. Instead, he studied Amelia, his pen lowering slowly to the table. "What makes you say that?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying weight that silenced several of the chuckles around them. The opposing lawyers shifted uneasily, but Amelia reached into her apron with trembling hands. From within, she pulled a folded piece of paper worn from years of being carried, its edges frayed. "My father was Professor Marcus Lane," she said quietly. "He used to warn me about clauses like this. He wrote down the traps, and I carried them because he told me they mattered. And this one," she pointed to the contract, "this is exactly what he described." For the first time, murmurs turned uncertain. Professor Marcus Lane was not a name unknown in economic circles. Though many in the room had dismissed him as eccentric, none could deny his published works had influenced financial law across several countries. A few lawyers exchanged wary glances, their laughter cut short. Adrian leaned forward, motioning to his assistant. "Check it," he said simply. His tone was controlled, but beneath it was a current of urgency. The assistant scrambled, pulling the contract toward him, scanning the highlighted lines with frantic precision. His brow furrowed. His lips parted. Then he looked up at Adrian with wide eyes. "She's right, sir," he whispered. "The clause, it transfers majority control within 90 days. You'd lose everything." The room exploded into chaos. Voices overlapped in panic and protest. Some demanded verification, others accused Amelia of trickery. The opposing CEO's smirk faltered, his face draining of its smug color. He tried to cover it with anger, shouting, "This is absurd. She's a waitress, for heaven's sake. Are we going to let a girl in an apron dictate billion-dollar deals?" But the tide was already shifting. One of Adrian's board members stood abruptly, slamming his fist against the table. "How did we miss this?" he barked at the legal team. "You were supposed to protect the company, and yet he gestured at Amelia, incredulous. "She caught what all of you ignored." More murmurs filled the room. "Professor Lane's daughter?" one woman whispered, disbelief in her tone. "If that's true, then—" Her words trailed off, but the implication lingered. Amelia felt her heart pound against her chest, but she refused to lower her gaze. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, but she stayed, her father's note still trembling in her hand. She wasn't here to humiliate anyone. She was here because truth mattered, and if she walked away now, Adrian Cross would lose everything. Adrian's eyes stayed locked on her. Amid the noise, amid the accusations, he sat back in his chair, thoughtful. He reached for the contract again, scanning the lines with new clarity. The smirk of his rival now looked desperate, strained. And as Adrian's expression shifted, the room fell gradually silent, everyone waiting for his response. Emilia swallowed, her voice breaking the silence once more. "I know I'm just the help tonight," she said softly, though her words carried strength. "I know I don't belong in this room. But I do know what my father taught me. And if you sign that paper, you'll hand your empire to men who don't deserve it. Don't do it." The hush that followed was deafening. Even those who had mocked her minutes before could not find words. For the first time, the billionaire's fate hung not in the hands of his lawyers or board, but in the voice of a young single mother with nothing but her father's wisdom and her courage. Adrian lowered the pen fully, his fingers drumming against the paper. His assistant stood rigid, confirming once more, "She's telling the truth." And the realization washed over the room like a cold wave. The gala had begun as a celebration, but now it stood on the edge of scandal, betrayal, and revelation, all because a waitress dared to speak. The silence stretched, thick as velvet, every eye pinned on Adrian, as though the weight of billions depended on the movement of his hand. The contract lay in front of him like a coiled snake, its polished edges disguising the venom beneath. His rival, Desmond Vale, shifted in his seat, sweat beating at his temple despite the cool air of the ballroom. Desmond's lawyers whispered frantically, their voices cracking in tones that betrayed fear. Emilia stood rooted to the spot, her tray clutched tightly at her side, wondering if she had gone too far or if she had just saved a man's legacy. Adrian's hand moved at last. But instead of signing, he reached for the contract, lifted it high enough for the entire room to see, and with one sharp tear ripped it straight down the middle. Gasps exploded across the gala, some in horror, some in relief. The sound of shredding paper cut through the chamber like thunder, final and absolute. Desmond surged to his feet. "This is madness," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Do you realize what you've just thrown away? Billions on the table. For my enemies to own me," Adrian interrupted, his voice calm but laced with steel. He dropped the shredded halves of the contract onto the table, dusting his hands as though ridding himself of filth. His eyes burned into Desmond's, no longer the polite rival, but a predator unmasking the hunter who had nearly trapped him. "You thought you could bury poison in gold, but you underestimated the room. You underestimated her." He turned toward Emilia, and the gesture alone stunned the guests into silence. "What's your name?" he asked, though his voice was gentler now. Her throat tightened. "Emilia Lane," she answered softly, her voice almost lost in the cavernous hall. The ripple that moved through the crowd was electric. Whispers darted back and forth. "Professor Lane's daughter, the waitress, the one who stopped the takeover." A few guests looked embarrassed, suddenly recalling their cruel remarks earlier in the night. Others exchanged nervous glances, wondering what fallout would come from their laughter. Adrian nodded slowly, as though memorizing the name. "Emilia Lane," he said aloud, deliberately, letting it echo through the chamber. "Tonight, you have done what my lawyers, my board, and even I failed to do. You saw the truth. You spoke it when no one else dared. And for that, you've saved not just me, but everyone who depends on this company staying ours." Gasps and murmurs filled the air again. A shareholder sputtered, "But she's a waitress." His protest came out feeble, almost pleading. Adrian's lips curved in the faintest of smiles, though his eyes remained sharp. "So she is," he replied smoothly. "A waitress who just prevented a hostile takeover worth billions. Tell me, what does that make you sitting in your seat, laughing while she does your job for you?" The shareholder fell silent, shrinking into his chair, red creeping across his face. Emilia stood frozen, heat flooding her cheeks. She had never wanted the spotlight, never wanted to be the subject of powerful stares, yet here she was standing at the center of a storm she had stirred. Her instincts told her to bow out quietly, to return to the shadows where no one could strike at her. But Adrian's gaze anchored her in place. "I want you in my office on Monday morning," Adrian said suddenly, his words cutting across the whispers. "Not as staff for the catering company, as my financial advisor." The entire room erupted. Some voices cried out in outrage, others in astonishment. Desmond laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You can't be serious. She's unqualified, inexperienced, and she is the only one in this room who had the vision to save me. Adrian interrupted again, his tone sharp enough to silence even his rival. He turned to the board members. If any of you have an issue, remember who failed me tonight. She didn't. Amelia's chest tightened, her breath catching in disbelief. Mr. Cross, I'm not qualified. You're qualified because you saw what no one else did, Adrian said firmly. His voice softened slightly, enough that only those closest could hear. Your father taught you well, and I trust you'll learn the rest quickly. I don't need polished resumes. I need the truth, and you've proven you have it. Her eyes burned with sudden tears, though she blinked them away quickly. Around her, she could feel the daggers of disapproval from guests who only hours earlier had dismissed her as nothing. But their scorn no longer had the same power. She had spoken, and she had been heard. The fallout was swift. Adrian's legal team, red-faced and fumbling, excused themselves in shame. Several board members who had mocked Amelia earlier slunk away quietly, their reputations crumbling in real time. And Desmond Vale stormed out, his empire's reputation shattered by exposure of his deception. Yet amid the wreckage, Amelia found herself strangely calm. She walked through the ballroom with her tray empty now, not because she had finished serving, but because she no longer needed to serve in that way. Whispers trailed after her, some in awe, some in jealousy, but none could erase what she had done. By the time the night ended, the story was already spreading beyond the gala walls. Phones buzzed with messages. Reporters whispered about the waitress who had saved Adrian Cross's fortune. And Amelia Lane, the girl who had once thought herself invisible, had become the symbol of truth spoken in the face of ridicule. On Monday morning, when she stepped into Adrian's office, she was no longer carrying a tray of champagne. She was carrying the weight of her father's legacy, her daughter's future, and the beginning of a destiny she had never imagined for herself. Moral lesson: life often measures worth by wealth, status, or appearance, but real power lies in courage, honesty, and wisdom carried quietly until the right moment. Amelia's voice reminded a world of glitter and arrogance that truth can come from the humblest of places. Her journey tells us, don't let others define your value, and never silence the knowledge you hold. Speak when it matters, even if your knees shake, because courage is contagious. Remember, you've got this. Stand tall, protect your values, and trust that the world makes space for those who dare to believe in themselves.